Okay, this is a recording of a presentation I gave on one of the community membership forums that we run monthly, where we get people to come in and just take part. There's a little bit of training, which I'm going to repeat here, and then we get to discuss things. I don't record the discussions. I'm just recording the presentation now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about shame and the 5 human needs. And this diagram is quite clever because it helps to map what happens in the brain to the kind of pyramid of human needs, which are at the base of the pyramid are the physiological needs of air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, being safe at the most basic level. And that sort of maps to the brain stem, the safety area of your brain, reptilian brain. And then moving up the ladder, there's safety needs like personal security, employment, having resources, having health, and, somewhere safe to live, a property of some sort. And then as we move up the pyramid, we're going into love and belonging, which is very, very important, but can only come in when you've got the basic needs met. So things like friendship, intimacy, family, if your family gives you that, sometimes it doesn't, and a sense of connection overall. And that sort of maps to this limbic area of the brain, or our emotional brain, which is a mammalian feature. It came in much later in terms of evolution. And then esteem, self-esteem, self-worth, self-respect, a sense of status or recognition, identity, a certain sense of individuation or freedom to act, until finally at the top, what we call self-actualization. Now, very few people really get to this stage, honestly, where you can be the most that you could be. You are really living life to the full, in full awareness of yourself, and literally being your best self. And that tends to map to the cortex when it's in connection with the other parts of the brain. It isn't naturally just a part of the cortex. And it can't work unless you've got these other systems talking to it. So it's very much about brain integration, actually. And so I think it's a fabulous slide. And now I want to talk a little bit more about shame, validation, and development. Now, shame is an internalized feeling of I'm wrong, bad, weird, not enough, unlovable. Sometimes people feel they're disgusting or just, completely irredeemable. And this comes from a deep lack of self-worth. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that arises. It's learned during development as one of the core 5 emotions: anger, sadness, joy, fear, and shame, which are common to all children going through childhood. And it's actually, shame is one of the more difficult ones to identify because it's not easy to know that you're in shame, but it's a failure of the prefrontal cortex. So that's the bit behind your eyes, to kind of adjust your brain to kind of, if you think of the analogy of a car, it's a sort of adjusting the clutch so that you can pick the right gear. And so your brain is not functioning well because it's not coordinating. And it's used in all families to limit unacceptable behavior, and usually primarily around the ages of 3 to 5, when children are starting to explore the world, and sometimes in an unsafe way. And that's why we use shame. Don't touch that, don't hit your sister. Those kinds of statements are shame-inducing to a child. And of course, they're essential because they keep the child safe to some degree, but they can become a currency in some families. They can be overused. And it's experienced by the child as a sinking feeling, and often they will turn away or look down, a heaviness in the chest. And we experience it similarly as adults, actually, but it's the first time the child will experience that, when they are shamed. And then the adult, well, a shame-filled adult has no internal sense of safe self or solid ground. It's like you don't have a foundation. And the consequences of that if you've been over-shamed in childhood are profound. Now, in order to deal with shame, we have to have validation. In other words, knowing what you think, feel, and dream is acceptable and legitimate by a person who shares your experience without judgment. So it's an interpersonal connection with someone else who believes you to be okay, and who is sharing your experience, whatever that is, anger, sadness, loss. But these elements of validation are often missing in shame-filled childhoods, and especially so if you're different in any way. You're the wrong color or race or gender or temperament or even sexuality. Sexuality is quite an interesting one because it's actually a family system rejection as well as a cultural one. With all the others, generally, if for instance, your race is different from the majority, it will still be shared by your family. Yes, Alan Downes' book, The Velvet Rage, is very good on that internal family system rejection. And how does it manifest in the adult? Well, it manifests as hiding out in your own life. And so you're going to be very anxious socially because you don't want to make yourself vulnerable, or you may overcompensate and become a workaholic. You may be over competitive or overachieving, always striving for perfection. So that horrible tyrant of perfectionism, never saying no, just over committing and not asking for help as well, because asking for help is an admission of vulnerability, and people who are full of shame don't like to admit vulnerability. Maybe you over control, or you become, addictive, or you're filled with narcissistic rage, which makes you want to actually control other people. So these are all wounds between the age of 3 and 5. And don't forget it's gendered. So it's different for men and women. And men are expected to be strong, not to fail. And so it's hard for those, especially sensitive men. A child has to be reassured, you see, that it's the behavior, not the child, that is needing to change. And if anger is added to the mix, then the apology, then you have to apologize to repair it. And if that doesn't happen reliably, well, the adult then learns that they're not enough, and they either disappear into themselves or deny connection and become clingy and demanding sometimes as well. And so how do we learn shame? Well, experiences like being shamed via parenting or schooling